You're listening to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.
Welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast. This is a weekly half-hour program focused on the relevant topics in Freemasonry and the various aspects of the craft. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, Editor-in-Chief of CraftsmanOnLine.com, and back on our Building Better Builders series is Brother John S. Nagy. Welcome back, Brother Nagy.
It's good to be here, Brother Michael. Thanks for having me.
I feel like we should have a double dip disclaimer for this episode of the Building Better Builders series because we're going to be talking about the Craft Unmasked, and you might remember Brother Nagy as a member of the Pearl de West Masonic Lodge number 146 in Newport Richey, Florida. He's also a part of the Florida Lodge of Research, a 32nd degree Mason, 2014 recipient of the Dwayne E. Anderson Award for Excellence in Masonic Education, and of course the author of the Building Better Builders series of uncommon Masonic education books in the Craft Unmasked, the uncommon origins of Freemasonry and its practices. Whew, that is
helpful.
But I'm glad that we got to focusing on this. And, you know, if there is a question you have had about anything in our beloved craft, chances are Brother Nagy has either written a book or a thought piece on it. And this whole episode came from just a question that I asked him about the origins of Freemasonry. And I'm glad you're here to give us this researcher's perspective of it. So should we start first with the very distinct warning that you usually give in presentations or in the book?
Sure, why not? Go ahead, go for it.
And I think the warning that you give is this point, if you're easily offended or not comfortable with having some of your beliefs or thoughts challenged, now turn away. That's kind of the gist of it, right?
I said, if I remember correctly, this book will challenge your preconceived notions. It will upset you. It will make you very perturbed, and that is not what it is intended to do. It is intended to share relevant light, real light, and please suspend any kind of conclusions till after you have gone through the entire book first, because as I shared the information, I will tell you, even the people who were reviewing the book before I published it were saying at first I was absolutely blown away. Secondly, I was disturbed. Third, I was upset. And they were going through a roller coaster of emotions. And no sooner did I get upset, I read a little bit more and I said, oh, okay, that makes sense. So the upset went away, and then they read a little bit more information. They got upset again, and then they read a little bit more information. Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Do you think it's because we're told one thing at the end of the third degree, and maybe some of us come into the craft with ideas of our own of what we believe Freemasonry to be, and then we're told at the end of the third degree, like, this is the story of Freemasonry, and then you start reading some of the books and the origins on it, and as we talked about, you know, having that faith of ours being challenged and the acceptance of it, it makes us uncomfortable. It can make us angry.
Biggest problem is, I believe, twofold. We're told a lot of information before we join that is the profane understanding of what it is that we are. And then you read some books and you go down that rabbit hole. And these books were written by individuals who had their own preconceived notions. So by the time you open the door, walk through, and basically get hit in the face with the information, literally, you have some preconceived notions of your own based on what you were told during the 3 degrees. And the warning that I would place on anybody joining the craft is, if you don't understand the word symbolic, you really need to tunnel down that rabbit hole, because the entire 3 degrees are referred to as the Blue Lodge, as the Craft Lodge, but most importantly, the Symbolic Lodge. And it's called that for an extremely good reason, because everything that is shared with you within those 3 degrees is symbolic. Even a thing that you believe that you have to take literally, no, it's symbolic. And if you don't understand what symbolic means, you're going to be misleading yourself into embracing things as if they are literal. And that, in our society, we have an entire generation of individuals who have absolutely no understanding of what symbolic means. They have no understanding of allegory. And as a result, they come in and they take things literally. And so when I point these things out within the book and show the symbolic meaning behind things and show what's really going on, it's quite upsetting, because the bubble's busted, whatever you want to call it. The individuals have a whole bunch of expectancies that all of a sudden get reframed, and everything that they thought goes out the door. And it's not that it isn't replaced with something that is of greater value. It's just unsettling to realize that, wow, it's not what I thought. And it's not nefarious. It's perfectly designed for human nature. And because we're human and we go through these degrees and we take things for granted, when the veil is ripped off, so is the Band-Aid. And it hurts. It hurts a lot sometimes.
Well, I feel like we did our due diligence, so if you're easily offended and you don't want to hear, you've been fully warned, and you've enjoyed almost 10 minutes of this podcast episode, so thanks for coming along this far. I remember where I first was when the idea of what I had been told Freemasonry was challenged, and I was reading John Robinson's book. I feel like we've talked about this a lot on the Craftsman Online podcast, Born in Blood. And that was the first time that I was like, wait a second, you're telling me that Masonry didn't come from the stonecraft, the stonecutters lodges that I've, heard so much about over time? And that's when I started to have my thoughts challenged on things. Obviously, Robinson refutes the idea that Freemasonry is the descendant of the stonemasons guilds and kind of lines things more up to the Knights Templar.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, I didn't want to give the spoiler alert to that book. What was the first piece of literature? Because you came to Masonry from a different perspective. I feel, a lot of men that I know, they come to Masonry and the esoteric aspects are introduced to their life thanks to the craft. But you came in with more of a background of that. So I'm interested to hear where your origin story was first challenged.
I started reading things about how Robinson's book was not on keel either. That although he rightfully, in my opinion, claims that we're not descendants from stonecraft, we're also not descendants of the Knights Templar. He was going on literature that was basically lore, and he took it as history. And so he tunneled down that rabbit hole with a preconceived notion of taking everything and examining everything in the light of the lore. And the lore had to do with the connection with the Knights Templar. And so what he did, he pursued it, and he had the confirmation bias thing going on. And as a result, he made that connection and he stood firm. But he was not a Mason. He wasn't an insider when he wrote that book. And as a result, he did eventually join the craft, but I would love to be able to talk with him and be able to discuss, in light of some of the material that I've come across, if he would second guess his connection with the Knights Templar. He's passed away from what I understand, so that's not going to happen, at least not in this lifetime. But back to the things that challenged me, I think it was when I started investigating some of the words that we used within the Craft Lodge. One of them stood out like a sore thumb, Cowan. As I went down that rabbit hole looking at the actual root of the word, the origin, and what I found out what it actually referred to in its origin, and how that particular word was used within many, many different documents in literal stonecraft lodges, calling them members. There's documents all over the place referring to members as Cowans, and these were legitimate craft members, part of the Stonecraft Lodge. And then what we find is that later on they were actual members of speculative lodges too. So where did this word creep in? And what I find is that somebody found an old document in I think there was 2 providences where there was a war with Cowans, and so therefore they sewed that into our lore. And they made it so that, we're supposed to keep Cowans out because this, and they had some very, very superficial justification for keeping them out. And what they don't realize is that Cowans were part of the craft, and it's a symbolic lodge. So you have to look at not the fact that they were kept out, or some of them actually were in, but what actually is a Cowan. And a Cowan is somebody who just doesn't build with the cement of brotherly love and affection, and they don't square their work. So why would you want them coming into the lodge if they're going to build with their brothers without love, and they're not going to refine their work to the point where it's snug?
Do you take Cowans to be a negative thing? Because just by that description, I think of Cowans as kind of maybe sloppy, unkept, below average.
They have their purpose, and we have them in our lodges, and they do just exactly what it is that they're willing to do, and they are great supports, but just don't expect them to square their work, and don't expect them to build with more love than you would expect from the brothers who do.
Right.
They have a certain understanding of the craft, and they will do certain jobs within the craft. Just don't expect more from them than they're willing to give. And we have quite a few, and God bless them. We need them. Without them, the craft actually would fall apart. However, we're back to, the literal versus the symbolic. And the symbolic is, well, why would you want to have anybody coming into the lodge that doesn't build with love and doesn't square their work? So they're not pretenders. They're individuals who are real. They're individuals that we can symbolically label them, but they are a reality.
Interesting, because, I think just hearing that definition of Cowan, because it's never really, at least in my experience, been fully explained as to what a Cowan is, except we hear it, usually tied together, Cowans and eavesdroppers. So we think of people that are trying to unlawfully gain Masonic information or access to a lodge, like somebody that you'd want to keep away, at least an arm's length away, because they don't deserve to be here. It's interesting to hear your definition of it. Again, getting away from the literal to, or the symbolic to the word usage of it, where you're like, okay, I can think now a Cowan is a brother that maybe with a little bit more support, as you mentioned, or foundation or work from the other brothers, we could help him in his work to write his work and be on the path to a more perfect Ashlar.
Or either that, or just accept the brother is not really pursuing any kind of refinement. They want to hang with other good men. See, Cowans, they're not bad men. They're just individuals who don't want to do specific work on themselves, and God bless them. They still want to support. They still want to get together. They still want to hobnob, and they are extremely good at supporting, but just don't expect more from them than they're willing to give.
Right. Yeah. And I always think of Cowans as like the old timey villain that, throws the cape over his face and is basically a villain of the craft, but they're not.
The idea is it's a symbolic lodge. So what do Cowans symbolically represent? And these are individuals effectively that you don't want to bring into your own lives, because they're individuals who don't build with love and they don't square their work. And if you are into refining and building a business or building a life or building relationships, you can't depend on them for anything other than what they actually are providing. And if you expect more, please don't.
Right.
But you see, that investigation of that one simple word and finding out what it is that I found out about it led me to look at other words like the word free. I will tell you that when I went down that rabbit hole and found out what the word actually meant, it rocked my world. And I started looking at, okay, well, what else is within Freemasonry are we told? Because we're told free and accepted. This is not universal, but I can tell you that I've brought it up enough to know that it's widespread amongst many jurisdictions, that there's an understanding that the word free, or shall I say, the term free and accepted means operative and speculative Mason. Free being operative, accepted being speculative. And my investigation basically found that's not only wrong, but it covers up what it actually meant to communicate initially early on. And we have entire generations of men being told false information. So that led me to say, what else about Freemasonry are we being told by basically brothers that don't know any better? And so I started tumbling down that rabbit hole even further, and I came across the word mastery, and I said, well, I'm going to look up mastery. I mean, I have some time this evening. Let me go down that rabbit hole. And when I found out that the word mastery and mystery actually were synonymous at one point in the semantic history between the two, I recognized that there's more to this than meets the eye. And that led the investigation of free and accepted, which I actually published a research book on that called Building Free Men. That laid the foundation for the Craft Unmasked, because there was a rabbit hole I chased on mystery versus mastery that led me to understand, and this one little clause it was a footnote in the bottom of a, back page. Mystery and mastery were universally synonymous, and only in the way that mystery is used in only one little clue that gave a background to the two being synonymous. That's in mystery plays. And I said, mystery plays? What's that? So what I did was I put that little baby on the side and I said, okay, I'll investigate that after I get done with this Building Free Men book. And I started investigating it, found out that the mystery schools were actually occupational schools in the medieval times, and they put on mystery plays, which were basically, mystery was an occupation. They put on occupational plays based on their guild. And you had guilds all over the place putting on different mystery plays or mastery plays. And Freemasonry, our Stonecraft brothers, were no less involved, according to what I've come across. So you had these wonderful morality plays called mystery plays put on by the occupational guilds, and our Stonecraft brothers were involved in that.
People are probably hearing this and going, plays? Like that, it almost takes out some of the significance or the educational opportunity that would be there. But you have to understand that back in like the 17, 16, 1500s, 1400s, they didn't have the, HR training videos that we've all had to sit and watch at work, that putting on a play was how they communicated.
They didn't have YouTube. They didn't know how to read. They didn't have HBO. They didn't have television. They didn't have radio. The only way that they educated what the Catholic Church referred to as the ignorant masses were these morality plays. And they were called saint plays, morality plays, mystery plays. They were all based on trying to basically communicate morals to the populace. And the guilds were involved in that. They took up the banner when the church pulled the plug on it, and they started doing these productions. And of course, they had their own marketing and advertisement inserted into their plays, and it was a way for them to market their wares and their services. But that was not the overt goal. The overt goal was to educate the masses in morality. And they used allegory coming out the wazoo. And lo and behold, what are we doing in Freemasonry? We have morality plays using allegory,
right?
Communicating moral things for moral purpose, communicating in such a way that we educate the individuals, the patrons who come through our process.
I think it's fair to say across every jurisdiction, when it comes to showing or displaying your proficiency, there is memorization that goes into place. We've talked about that before, the parenting, the roboting, but what you're really hoping for is that, the brother absorbs it and is able to repeat it back with the knowledge and the passion of understanding it. And it's compelled him to live a better life. The morality lesson is really sunk in. But that was one thing that I found interesting about Freemasonry was once you go through the degrees and you become a master mason, and even not, if you're able to in your jurisdiction to be there for the opening and closing of the lodge and see that quote unquote performance, that's a little mini play within itself. There's a lot of plays, as you mentioned, that happen in our rituals. So did you start to connect, the theater aspect, the production aspect in Freemasonry with the times?
What I concluded is that I started evaluating the craft after a while. I'm a business coach, and I'm trained. I have a master's in engineering management, and I was taught in the industrial engineering college how to go into an organization and evaluate it open-mindedly, unbiased, and take a good look at what they are doing, match it up against what they say they're doing, and compare the notes, make sure there's integrity, and then start taking a look at where improvement can occur. So what I did was I rolled up my sleeves and I put my profession to work, and I evaluated the lore versus actual history, what we say we do as opposed to what we actually are doing. And as you had said, proficiencies, we're learning scripts, mouth to ear, the old style. Basically, the best way to learn how to communicate a play is to learn the script. And so what we do is we have 3 different scripts at 3 different levels so that as a candidate comes through, what they can do is they can learn these scripts and they can plug and play into the organization fairly quickly, because once they understand the scripts, or shall I say, once they've memorized the scripts, they don't have to understand it. They can actually join in on the fun of making good men better. Or basically another way of saying that is making more members. So they've been made a member. They learn the script of how to make members. They plug and play. They make more members. And they don't have to understand. And that is, I think, one of our greatest shortfallings as an organization. There have been a lot of efforts from jurisdictions to explain the symbolism and the relevance, and they do a fairly good job of a superficial education in explaining it. However, the problem is the people who are explaining it themselves are reaching for straws many times. They themselves don't understand the relevance of what is being communicated by the scripts. The scripts were put together over many, many generations. They were added to. As much as we want to say that there's been no innovation, God bless us, we have invigorated the process at every twist and turn, and what we started out with as an organization 300 plus years ago, we don't have today. And they've been modified. They've been squished through a sieve at times, and they're nothing like what it is that we had originally. They had the moralization of the working tools that were added early on and then moralized later on. The perfect Ashlar only first appeared when the merger of those 2 warring Grand Lodges come together to create the United Grand Lodge of England. And bingo, all of a sudden we've got a perfect Ashlar. Where did that come from? Yeah. And actually it was the Perpend Ashlar initially, and anybody who knows any of the history, they are considered synonymous, because there's no way the description of the perfect Ashlar would be ever used in any building. It's useless. As a perfect square, a perfect cube, they don't use that in building. The smooth surface wouldn't hold the cement, and the only place you could ever put even a rough cube like that formation is as cornerstones. So, yeah, we've got a lot of things that we got generation after generation. They just simply don't understand what we're really doing. And back to the proficiencies. Good God, it'd be very nice to have people understand what it is that they're learning, but most lodges don't take the time to really do anything other than superficial explanations, and the explanations that are given are what were given to them.
Right. Well, what tends to happen, and this is, I'm sure you've heard this complaint many a time as well, is a man comes to a lodge interested in joining Freemasonry. Hopefully he's not given a petition on the first night that he visits to join the lodge. Hopefully they, have him visit a few times so they can make sure that this is right for him. But eventually he does, and he goes through all the paperwork, and then he takes that first degree, and then he spends a significant amount of time, hopefully again, going through the proficiency to eventually become a Master Mason. And then myself personally, after investing about a year in going through the 3 degrees, you come to your first meeting and you find out we're going to have discussions about the roof and all of the wonderful esoteric or historical or dramas or plays that you had seen previously in the degrees in the meetings you were able to attend don't happen at the regular lodge meetings, and you wonder what's going on here. So hopefully some of those brothers get into being a part of the degree team and, focusing on that. But my question for you is, how should we, and mainly should we, start setting expectation levels or explaining to new members the difference between the degree ritual of Freemasonry and the Masonic education that can come after the degrees are conferred?
Oh, I've got something in the end of the Craft Unmasked where I say this is something that every candidate ought to know, and that you're installing roadmaps in your head and hopefully in your heart. And the roadmaps are the degrees. And if you understand verbatim, let me phrase that, if you remember verbatim what it is that each line that is handed to you that you are asked to memorize, they're codes. They're codes to help you focus on working toward improving yourself as a man. I don't know if I say this specifically in that particular end of the book, but it should be enough to tell a man what to do. If he is a man and he understands the relevance of what it is that he must be doing, he'll do it. He doesn't need any coaxing. He doesn't need any prodding. He's not going to be supported in any other way than to be told, just do it. And so if you come in to embrace what is required to become a better man, and you come in and you're a good man, when you hear that, well, if you come in with the intent of becoming better, then the script will be evaluated for clues as to, okay, where does it in the script tell me I can improve myself? And the first degree, as I had indicated, there are a whole bunch of tools that you are introduced to at just the entered apprentice level that if you take them in hand, understand what they're supposed to be used for or how they are to be developed in your life, you can improve leaps and bounds. But if you are not an individual who works on self-improvement and you need coaching, chances are it's going to be dragging you kicking and screaming if you're asked to do it. But if you are driven to do it, you're going to basically say, don't get in my way. I've got something to do and I need to work on myself. And therefore, unless you can help me work on myself, don't distract me. You become a superfluity and possibly even a vice, harmful to me.
Right. I feel like we did so much build-up at the beginning, and I felt this way when I watched your presentation on the Craft Unmasked, the uncommon origin of Freemasonry and its practices, where, you tune in and there's all these brothers that are in this room and a Zoom meeting, and it's like, okay, Brother John's going to give this presentation. It's like, almost flashing lights, like warning, warning. And what I found refreshing after you finished the presentation and got to the questions and asked questions was you were actually asked questions that weren't challenging your research or these new ideas, but mainly questions of brothers that were kind of reaffirming and almost felt reassured that you had laid this out, that there was always speculation of some of these things. I'm just curious that, what is some of the feedback that you've heard from other brothers in other presentations or from folks that have read your book based on this research that you've laid out?
Most all of the feedback that I get from people who actually take time to read this book all the way through is, wow, I've actually come across 12 other theories before this one. And, when I heard them say 12 other theories, I'm saying to myself, well, I really wasn't writing a theoretical book. I was writing a book describing what I saw and basically putting a description on what I saw and labeling it based on the description. And when I started hearing this thing referring to my book as a 13th theory, I said, oh my God, is that what I did? Did I put a theory out there? Because, as an engineering management professional, I did evaluate, and I actually put down my findings. And my findings basically said we are, how do I refer to that in the book? We are a totally immersive, arena-style, role-playing theatrical society with a moral purpose. And I go on to say, and when you think about it, so are a lot of other organizations, if they want to be honest, institutions, even workplaces where all role-playing, we're asked to embrace some principles and abide by them and stick to it. And we've got a script that we've got to follow. And in our case, as an organization, the basic premise is betterment. And not only is it betterment, but we take it on good authority that the individual who's coming through is morally good. And the only way to make a morally good person better is to improve their morality. And so how do you go about doing that? Well, you don't coerce them. You don't threaten them. You basically point the way and say, all right, if you're a man of your word, you're going to be true to your word. By gosh, here's the script that you've got to follow in order for you to better who you are. And the biggest problem is when you start to think about the fact that, yes, we're given scripts. Yes, we're told the directions we need to follow, and we are role playing. I mean, literally throughout our entire ritual, we're pointing out that in the character of, you are now an actor of, and you will play the part. And it's not like we're not saying it in ritual. We say it in 6 or 7 different places, literally blatantly, that we are playing a role. And so it's no small surprise that when I put that out there, I hear brothers saying, well, yeah, come to think of it, I guess you're right. It's never thought of in those terms. And yet when you put it out there on the table for everybody to see plain as day, it's very difficult to argue with because it's literally what we're saying in our script. We've got a script. The script says that we're a living actor. And where you go from there, you can argue and say, oh, no, there's more. Well, yes, Brother Michael, there is much, much more, but you have to embrace the role in order for you to get it. And there is the admission. It's kind of hurtful to admit at first, but once you embrace it and recognize, no, we're playing a role. I have embraced the role of a speculative Mason, and I play the part to the best of my ability. Yes, I mess up, but I get back on script as soon as I find out. And the script is pretty straightforward. Be moral and improve yourself where you can. Not rocket science. And it is acting. But the neat thing about it is, in the book, I say something along the lines of, when you become the role authentically, when you're no longer playing it inauthentically, where you become the very thing that you are trying to portray, you become the master's word. You literally become the very thing that you seek. And once you become authentically the role that you're playing, life gets better.
The book is The Craft Unmasked, The Uncommon Origin of Freemasonry and Its Practices. The author, Brother John S. Nagy, and you can get your copy at coach.net. That's coach.net. Of course, you can also get his full Building Better Builder series. My favorite thing is, get on his blog and get his thoughts at like 3, 4 in the morning. We got to talk about that when you just have these Masonic flashes of brilliance and you share them with all of us who follow you. So thank you very much for again coming on this episode of Craftsman Online, Brother Nagy.
Thank you for having me, Brother Michael. It's an honor and a privilege, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation. We'll be discussing what?
Setting the plum. We're going to be talking about setting the plum on August 29th.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun one. Super. And that's a nice follow-up to the working tools that we did last time.
We're trying to get a theme going here. Yeah. Give us some time. The Building Better Builder series will continue. If Masonic education is important to you, you can sign up for our emails newsletter at CraftsmenOnLine.com. A reminder that new episodes of the Craftsman Online podcast are available for download Monday mornings. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.
You've been listening to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.